She stood frozen at the whiteboard, called up in front of the whole class, not to learn, but to be humiliated. Let's see what the janitor's daughter can solve. The teacher smirked, as students snickered behind their hands. But as the marker touched the board, what came next would silence them all, and expose the school's darkest secret. She wasn't just solving for X. She was solving for justice. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. And someone was about to lose everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Brookstone Academy smelled like new money and old secrets. Its marble floors gleamed so brightly that students could see their own reflections as they passed through the echoing hallways. The walls were lined with brass plaques, names of donors, headmasters, and alumni who'd gone on to rule boardrooms and benchrooms across the country. Every detail screamed perfection, which is why Amira Collins, 13 years old, and born of modest means, knew she didn't belong here the moment she stepped inside. She kept her head down, adjusting the strap of her second-hand backpack that had once been light blue but now faded into a tired gray. Her sneakers, clean but aged, squeaked slightly with each step. As she passed through the main corridor, students walked in small packs, their laughter bouncing between the lockers like the ping of an exclusive social code she hadn't been given. Amira had been admitted on a need-based academic scholarship. One of the few. The letter had arrived in the spring, a crisp white envelope that felt like a promise. Her father, Walter Collins, had read it 3 times before speaking. "Brookstone," he'd said slowly, "that's where I clean floors. You sure you want this, baby girl?" Amira had nodded then, but now, walking into her first day, she wasn't so sure. The school's air felt colder, its ceilings impossibly high. She passed the main lobby, where a towering glass window cast golden light across the polished floor. There, just beyond a velvet rope, she saw him, her father. Walter, mid-50s, wiry but strong, mop in hand, wiping the edges of the trophy cabinet. He didn't see her, or if he did, he didn't show it. That was the rule. At school they didn't know each other. It had been his idea. "You don't need my shadow following you into that classroom," he'd said. "You shine how you were meant to shine." So she walked past him. Just a girl on her way to class. Not a janitor's daughter. Not a charity case. Just Amira. But Brookstone didn't let her forget. It began with the stares. The way students looked her up and down, like they were scanning for labels they couldn't find. Her uniform was correct, but the cut was off. A cheaper fabric. Her hair was braided neatly, but not professionally. Her lunch was packed from home, in reusable containers that looked out of place next to monogrammed bento boxes. By lunch, the whispers had started. "Is she like one of the community outreach kids?" someone had said, not quietly enough. Another girl with pearl earrings had laughed. "She brought chicken salad in Tupperware. My nanny makes that for our dogs." Amira pretended not to hear. She'd mastered that years ago. Teachers weren't unkind, but there was a distance, a polite indifference. Some offered tight smiles, others simply glanced past her. Only one seemed to really notice her. Miss Halbridge. Tall, slender, and always impeccably dressed. Miss Halbridge looked like she'd stepped out of an old prep school catalog. Her salt and pepper hair was coiled into a low bun, and her glasses rested perfectly on her nose. She taught advanced mathematics and carried herself like her subject, precise, unforgiving, and cold. From the moment Amira entered the room, Miss Halbridge clocked her, not just noticed her, assessed her. The teacher's eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of Amira's scuffed shoes and homemade binder. Amira sat in the second row, trying to disappear. But Miss Halbridge called roll in a tone that made even the popular kids sit straighter. "Collins, Amira," she said, looking up sharply when she reached the name. "Here," Amira answered softly. Miss Halbridge let the silence hang for a beat too long, then marked her clipboard. No smile, no nod. Just something unreadable in her eyes. The class began, and equations filled the board. Amira copied them down, her pen quick and steady. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Numbers made more sense than people ever had. They didn't lie, didn't mock, didn't whisper. But even as she worked, she could feel Miss Halbridge watching her. Not with curiosity, but with something colder, suspicion. After class, as students packed their bags, Miss Halbridge lingered near the door. Her heels clicked against the floor like a metronome.
"Miss Collins," she said sharply,
Amira froze. Your homework, Miss Halbrecht continued. Her tone clipped. Please ensure it's handwritten. No calculators. I want to see how you think. Amira nodded silently. She understood. It wasn't about the homework. It was a challenge. That night, Walter scrubbed cafeteria tables while Amira sat in the corner with her math book open. She worked quickly, eyes narrowing as she dissected the problems. Walter watched her from across the room, pride blooming quietly in his chest. But he said nothing. He knew better than to draw attention. The next morning, Amira placed her homework on the edge of her desk before class started. Miss Halbrecht picked it up, scanned the first page, then moved on without a word. By the end of the week, Amira had settled into the rhythm of the school. She kept her head down, did her work, and stayed invisible. Or tried to. But perfection doesn't like reminders of struggle. And Brookstone's perfection was fragile. On Friday, a storm rolled in. Rain beat against the windows as students filed into class. Miss Halbrecht stood at the board, her face unreadable as ever. But something was different. A peculiar tension hung in the room. On the board behind her, an equation stretched from one end to the other, long, complex, clearly above grade level. Students whispered nervously. Miss Halbrecht turned slowly. Let's start with a bit of fun today, she said. Her eyes scanned the room, lingering on familiar faces before landing on one. Miss Collins, she said. Amira looked up. Why don't you come solve this for us? A few students snickered. Others glanced around, confused. Amira stood slowly, her heart pounded. She walked to the front of the room, the weight of every stare heavy on her back. Miss Halbrecht stepped aside, lips curled into a faint mocking smile. The marker sat in the tray beneath the board. Amira picked it up with trembling fingers. Miss Halbrecht leaned against her desk, arms crossed. Let's see how much our scholarship has taught you. In the quiet of the room just before Amira touches the board, Miss Halbrecht glances down at the classroom roster again, and the corner of her mouth lifts, like a plan she set in motion is finally unfolding. It's not in the student handbook, but everyone knows who's allowed to speak, and who isn't. The marker never touched the board, not yet. Miss Halbrecht's eyes remained fixed on Amira, her smirk as sharp as chalk dust under a microscope. The class was silent, waiting for a mistake. Amira's fingers tightened around the marker, as her mind raced, not just through formulas but through consequences. She could solve this equation, but would that be seen as arrogance, defiance, or simply impossible? Before she could lift her hand, the bell rang. A shrill, unexpected reprieve. Chairs scraped back, and the room exhaled in a rush of movement. Miss Halbrecht's voice sliced through the chatter. We'll finish this tomorrow. Amira returned to her seat, heart pounding, throat dry. She didn't meet anyone's eyes. Especially not Miss Halbrecht. But she felt them, watching, measuring. That night she didn't sleep much. She rewrote the problem from memory, solving it 6 different ways just to be sure. It wasn't the math that scared her. It was everything around it. By Monday, the hallway had shifted. Not the floors or the lighting, but the energy. It wasn't that Amira had done anything yet, but something had shifted in the way people looked at her. She had become a curiosity. And in Brookstone, curiosity was dangerous if you were standing on the wrong rung. The school operated on a set of rules that no one wrote down but everyone obeyed. Legacy students, those whose parents' names graced plaques and built wings, sat in the front, spoke with ease, and made mistakes without consequence. They called teachers by nicknames, cut in lunch lines, and wore confidence like cologne. Their power wasn't earned, it was inherited. Then came the full tuition students from wealthy families, polished, competitive, always calculating. Then came the middle tier, the athletes, the performers, the quietly brilliant, and finally, at the bottom, the scholarship kids. Not many. 5, maybe 6 in total, invisible, disposable. Amira learned this quickly. It was in the way Ms. Greaves, the science teacher, double-checked her lab data, but smiled warmly at the legacy boy who spilled chemicals on the floor. It was in how Coach Denver assumed she couldn't play tennis, and didn't bother asking. It was in the lunchroom, where students spoke around her but never to her. The racism wasn't always loud. That's what made it harder. A white girl at her table had laughed as she whispered, I didn't know black girls were into robotics. Thought y'all were more dance team. Another boy had smirked and said, you speak really well. Like for someone, and everyone had laughed, except Amira. She'd nodded. That's what they expected. Quiet endurance. But she noticed everything. One afternoon, as she sat alone in the library pretending to read, someone slid into the seat across from her. It was a girl with cropped blonde hair, chipped black nail polish, and a hoodie that had clearly been washed one too many times. "You don't talk much," she said. Amira blinked. "Neither do you." "Tasha Levine," the girl replied. "My mom works night shifts at St. Clair's Hospital." "You?" "Walter Collins," Amira said after a pause. "Custodian." Tasha grinned. "Then I guess we both know we're not supposed to be here." They didn't talk about their backgrounds much after that. They didn't need to. In a school where status whispered through every hallway, their silence said more than enough. Tasha knew the rules better than anyone. Brookstone doesn't throw you out. It waits for you to fail, then acts surprised when you do, she explained one day, as they sat on the back steps during lunch. "How do you know?" Amira asked. "My cousin came here last year, full scholarship. They buried her with extra assignments, no help, and a detention for wearing the wrong socks. She transferred out by spring." Amira stared at the sky, her sandwich forgotten in her lap. "It's not the work," Tasha continued. "It's the silence. You start wondering if you even exist." That night, Amira told her father about Tasha. Walter was sitting on the floor of their apartment, organizing his tools for the next day. "She's smart," Amira said. "She's been here longer. She says I should be careful." Walter looked up slowly. "I've cleaned those halls for 11 years. I've seen a lot of kids come and go. You know who stays?" "Who?" "The ones who don't try to belong. They just try to survive." Amira swallowed hard. "You ever wish I hadn't come here?" He chuckled, a low, tired sound. "Every day. And every day I remember you were born to do more than mop floors and swallow your tongue." The next morning, Walter walked Amira to the edge of the parking lot before disappearing into the service entrance. She walked alone through the main doors and noticed it again, that faint shift of attention. Teachers' smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. Students watched her like she was a glitch in the system. At lunch, someone had taken her seat. When she asked politely, the boy with gelled hair shrugged. "We're full. Maybe try the scholarship table." There was no scholarship table. Amira walked away without a word. Later that day, her father crossed the hallway near the science lab, pushing his mop cart. Two boys passed by, snickering as one dropped a soda can deliberately onto the floor. Walter picked it up without complaint. Amira saw it from a distance, and turned before anyone could see her watching. Tasha found her in the library afterward. "They'll test you in silence," she said again. "And then they'll pretend they never heard you scream." Amira nodded, her expression unreadable. She had begun to understand what silence cost. The next day, as students filed into math class, Miss Halbrick stood at the front with a thin stack of papers in her hand. She handed them out with mechanical precision. When she reached Amira's desk, she placed hers down with deliberate slowness. "Stay after class," she said quietly. Tasha, sitting one row behind, looked up sharply. Amira said nothing. The period passed in an anxious blur. The equations were hard, but she answered them anyway. She didn't want to give Miss Halbrich any reason to question her. Not yet. When the bell rang, students filed out, casting curious glances back. Tasha hesitated at the door, but Amira gave her a small nod. "Go." Miss Halbrich waited until they were alone. Then, without a word, she walked to the whiteboard and picked up the marker. She drew another equation, more advanced than the last. Then she turned, eyes cold. "Let's see how smart you really are." As Amira walks to the board, Miss Halbrich slips a folded slip of paper onto her desk. Amira's last test, a bright red B at the top, circled with the words "unclear methodology. Needs verification." The marker sat cold and unfamiliar in Amira's hand, but the attention was burning. 28 sets of eyes bore into her back like lasers. She could feel the tension thicken with every passing second. Miss Halbrich had orchestrated this moment like a symphony, and Amira was the intended crescendo. The equation on the board was monstrous, an elaborate pre-calculus problem layered with trigonometric identities, irrational functions, and logarithmic expressions. It stretched nearly the full width of the whiteboard, like an academic dare. "We'll consider this a warm-up quiz," Miss Halbrich had announced earlier, tone sweetened with condescension. Then, with deliberate care, she added, "Maybe the janitor's daughter can clean this up for us." The room had frozen. A few students chuckled, low, cruel, waiting for the punchline. Others watched with wide eyes. the kind reserved for train wrecks and public embarrassment. Tasha at the back gripped her pencil until her knuckles went white. Amira didn't flinch. Not on the outside. Inside, she was unraveling. She'd never seen this exact equation before, but fragments of it echoed patterns she knew. Her father's college books. Late nights reworking complex problems just for fun. This was harder. It was deliberate. But it wasn't impossible. Still, she hesitated. What if she got it wrong? What if she gave them exactly what they wanted? Confirmation that she didn't belong. Miss Helbrick stepped back, arms folded. Her smirk hadn't moved. She had made Amira the lesson. Take your time, Miss Collins, she said. It's not like the rest of us are busy learning or anything. The jab was met with muffled snickers. Not a single teacher in the hallway peeked in. The system protected its own. Amira stared at the first term. A trigonometric identity nested in a rational function. She exhaled slowly. Her mind, still humming from the humiliation, began to settle into the rhythm she trusted. One term at a time. Her right hand lifted. The marker touched the board. She started writing. At first the sound was the only thing in the room. The squeak of ink against the surface. She broke the problem into sections. Labeled each step. The silence behind her grew heavier. She outlined the function's inner symmetry, pointed out the redundant terms, and cross-cancelled with purpose. Her handwriting was clean, confident, precise, the same way Walter had taught her to solve household problems, with methodical calm, no matter the chaos. Halfway through, the murmurs began to die. Miss Helbrick remained still, but her expression tightened. Tasha leaned forward, eyes darting from Amira to the board and back. It took 6 minutes. When Amira reached the final term and simplified the answer, she stepped back. Her chest was tight, but her spine straightened. Miss Helbrick walked to the board. Her heels clicked like gunshots. She scanned the solution, arms still crossed, lips tight. The class waited. A full 30 seconds passed. Interesting, Miss Helbrick finally said. I suppose you memorized this from some YouTube tutorial. The laughter was hesitant, confused. Amira didn't respond. She didn't need to. The work spoke for itself. Miss Helbrick took the marker and began erasing one section. She tried to find an error. There wasn't one. She paused again. Then she turned to the class. This is acceptable, she said. Barely. She didn't look at Amira when she said it. Amira returned to her seat. The silence followed her. Some students stared. A few whispered. One or two seemed impressed, but no one clapped. This wasn't the kind of school where applause followed you unless you were wearing the right crest. Tasha caught her eye. Nodded. Miss Helbrick handed back the rest of the pop quiz sheets. Amira's test was placed last, as if by accident. A bright red B glared from the top. Beneath it, unclear methodology. Needs verification. Amira blinked. She'd shown every step. This wasn't about clarity. It was about control. The rest of the day blurred. At lunch, Amira sat with Tasha, neither of them saying much. Words would have made it heavier. Her mind replayed the equation, the smirks, the B. She wanted to talk to someone, maybe Walter, but she knew his rule. Don't draw heat. After school, Amira returned to the math room. The halls were quiet. Through the window, she saw Miss Helbrick gathering papers. She knocked. The teacher didn't look up. Come in. Amira stepped inside. Her voice was calm. I wanted to ask about my grade. Miss Helbrick looked at her for a long moment. You should be grateful for what you received. This school is challenging. It's easy to make mistakes when you're out of your depth. Amira swallowed the lump rising in her throat. I showed all my work. Miss Helbrick tilted her head. There are different kinds of intelligence, Miss Collins. Raw instinct isn't the same as academic rigor. We value structure here. That night, Amira redid the problem on a clean sheet of paper, then another. She emailed both to the head of the math department, copying Miss Helbrick. No one replied. 2 days later, the equation reappeared on a bulletin board outside the classroom. But her name wasn't on it. That afternoon, a visitor from the state STEM board arrives to observe Brookstone's math program and asks to sit in on Miss Helbrick's class the next day. Just as Amira walks by, what was meant to shame her becomes the moment no one forgets. The announcement came through an email to all faculty. A representative from the state's STEM Advancement Initiative would be visiting Brookstone for an unannounced evaluation. The stated goal was to observe instructional methods and student engagement. Unstated but deeply understood was the pressure it placed on teachers, especially those with reputations to defend. Miss Halbridge wore a sharper suit than usual. That morning, her makeup was exact, her steps even more poised, but her eyes, those gave away a flicker of something rarely seen in her nerves. The visitor, Dr. Evelyn Trent, arrived just as the first bell rang. She was in her late 40s, with a warm but unreadable face, and carried a slim leather notebook in one hand. She wore her intelligence like a tailored coat, elegant, effortless, and too heavy for decoration. "I'd like to observe your advanced group," she said calmly to Miss Halbridge. Of course, Halbridge replied with a tight smile, gesturing toward her classroom. What neither woman acknowledged was that, just a few feet away, Amira had stopped mid-step outside the doorway. Her presence hadn't been noticed yet, but her ears caught every word. Something tightened in her chest. She wasn't sure why, until she stepped into the room and saw that the equation she'd solved 2 days ago was back on the board. But now it was labeled Example Solution, Anonymous Submission. Amira stared at it. Her handwriting had been copied and typed over, but the structure, the method, it was hers. She knew it, the way a musician knows her own chords. Her eyes flicked to Miss Halbridge, who was at her desk talking calmly with Dr. Trent. There was no mention of Amira, no credit, no acknowledgement. And suddenly, she understood something. Numbers didn't lie, but people did. They lied through omission, through control, through subtle theft. As class began, Miss Halbridge stood confidently beside the board. "Today we'll revisit an exceptional solution from one of our more recent problems," she began. "This anonymous submission displays technique, but more importantly, it demonstrates how structure elevates instinct." Amira's stomach turned. She wasn't just being erased. She was being used as a silent lesson, a ghost solving problems no one believed she could. The class nodded along, not knowing they were clapping for someone right in the room. Tasha glanced at Amira. Their eyes met, and something shifted. After class, Amira packed her things quietly. She didn't approach Miss Halbridge. She didn't argue. She just left. But the betrayal weighed heavier than any insult she'd ever heard. That night, Walter noticed the difference. "You're walking quieter," he said, eyes scanning her face as she picked at her dinner. "I'm tired," she said. He nodded slowly. "School tired or something? Ain't right tired?" She hesitated. "Then, they used my work, called it anonymous." Walter looked down at his hands, rough and calloused from years of bleach and concrete. "That kind of tired runs deeper than books." She looked at him. "What do you do when people pretend you don't exist?" "You make 'em regret forgetting." The next morning, Amira made a decision. She would no longer shrink. She'd stop handing over her work like a secret. If they wanted to silence her, they'd have to try harder. In math class, she raised her hand. For the first time, Miss Halbridge paused, taken aback. "Yes, Miss Collins. I'd like to share my solution," Amira said, her voice calm, steady. "Since it's already been shared anonymously." The room froze. Dr. Trent looked up from her notes. Miss Halbridge's eyes narrowed. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," Amira replied. "That equation was mine. The one you posted. You just forgot to include my name." It was the first time Amira had ever seen Miss Halbridge's mask break. Just for a second. The teacher recovered quickly. "There's no need to be defensive. We often post examples anonymously to protect students from pressure." "I didn't ask for protection," Amira said. "I asked for acknowledgement." A few students murmured. Tasha leaned forward, visibly proud. Dr. Trent scribbled something in her notebook. Miss Halbridge didn't respond immediately. Then, with forced politeness, she said, "We can discuss this after class." But the moment had already landed. A pin drop of truth in a room full of assumptions. After class, Amira waited. Dr. Trent approached her instead. "That was your work?" "Yes. You've got a sharp mind. Not many students can solve multivariable integration with that kind of finesse." "Thank you," Amira said. Trent lowered her voice. "You ever think of competing? National Math League? Or STEM workshops? I didn't think I'd be allowed. You'd be surprised what doors open when the right people are watching." That evening, Amira brought home a flyer, an invitation to a statewide math showcase. Dr. Trent had left it on her desk. Walter read it over slowly, then smiled. "Looks like somebody finally noticed." But the celebration was short-lived. The next morning, Amira arrived to find her locker open. Her books dumped on the floor, her notebooks torn. On the inside of the door, Someone had scrawled in thick red marker, "Stay in your place, mop girl." Tasha found her moments later, crouched on the floor, gathering pages. "They think they're clever," she said bitterly, "but they're scared." Amira looked up, eyes stinging. "Scared of what?" "You. Outthinking them. Outlasting them." Walter came to the school that afternoon. Quietly, through the side entrance, like he always did. But instead of going to his usual supply closet, he stopped outside the principal's office and waited. As Walter sits down across from the principal, the door creaks open. Miss Halbrick steps inside, unaware that Amira's father isn't just the janitor today. He's come to speak. Brookstone liked to think of itself as progressive, inclusive, a shining example of academic excellence that welcomed all kinds of minds. But Amira Collins learned quickly that there were limits to that welcome, limits shaped by skin, by silence, and by status. 2 days after she solved the impossible equation on the board, Amira was called into the administrative office, not to be congratulated, not to be praised, but to be questioned. 3 adults sat around her in a quiet room: an assistant principal, the school guidance counselor, and a curriculum advisor. Each smiled politely, each spoke softly, but their words carried weight. "We're just curious, Amira," the assistant principal began, "about where you developed this level of math fluency. It's not something we typically see in a first-year student, especially from a non-preparatory background." Amira blinked. "I studied." "Of course," the curriculum advisor said quickly. "We're not saying you didn't. Just wondering if there's any kind of support you've been receiving outside the classroom. Any tutoring, coaching, online courses?" Amira looked at them, confused. "No, I read old textbooks. I taught myself." There was a long pause. The counselor leaned forward gently. "We just want to ensure there's academic integrity here. Sometimes, gifted students can feel pressured to overperform." The words landed heavy. She wasn't being celebrated. She was being interrogated. That evening, Walter was called in for a separate meeting. They didn't say it outright, but he could feel it in the way they asked their questions. "Do you help her study? Does she have access to any advanced materials at home? Has she worked with anyone from outside Brookstone's approved curriculum?" Walter kept his answers short, calm. But inside, he boiled. "My daughter reads math journals while I mop floors," he said finally. "She's not cheating. She's learning. You should try it." The administrators nodded politely but made notes as he spoke. Walter could feel it, the invisible file being compiled. The one that didn't exist on paper but followed Amira everywhere she walked. The next day, during dismissal, Amira lingered near the front gates. She overheard 2 white parents chatting while waiting for their children. "Did you hear about the Collins girl?" one said. "The janitor's daughter? Yeah, they're saying she hacked her way through that quiz. I mean, it's just strange, right? Kids like that don't just wake up knowing calculus." Amira turned away before they could see her face. That night, she cried quietly in her room. Not because she'd done something wrong, but because doing something right had only made her more of a target. She didn't tell Walter. He was already carrying too much. The next day, something unexpected happened. Amira received an email from someone named Dr. Renee Patterson. The subject line read, "Let's talk brilliance." The body of the message was brief. "Amira, I saw your work. I'd love to meet. STEM needs minds like yours. No pressure, just curiosity. Renee." She read it twice. It was the first time anyone had looked at her mind and not her background. Cliffhanger, Amira clicks reply, her fingers trembling slightly, unaware that her response will spark a chain reaction neither she nor the school can control. It started with a handshake. Dr. Meredith Grayson was nothing like the other adults Amira had met since Brookstone. She didn't start by asking about grades or extracurriculars. She started with eye contact, warmth, and something Amira hadn't felt from an educator since she arrived at Brookstone. They met at a university coffee shop downtown, a halfway point between the prestigious Ivy League campus and the school Amira had begun to associate with tension. Walter accompanied her, sitting just far enough to give space, but close enough to intervene if needed. He didn't need to. Dr. Grayson got straight to the point. "I reviewed the footage of your board solution. Not just impressive, exceptional. I ran it past 2 of my colleagues in the mathematics department. They thought it was staged until I showed them your age." Amira said nothing. Dr. Grayson continued. "We ran a few assessments. Based on what I saw, and with your father's permission, I conducted a formal cognitive aptitude evaluation. She slid a paper across the table. Amira stared at the number at the top.
That puts you in the genius range. Dr. Grayson said, less than 1% of the global population scores that high, and almost none of them come from where you come from. That's not a knock. It's a truth the system refuses to acknowledge.
Walter looked overwhelmed. He said little. His calloused hands folded tightly in his lap. Dr. Grayson leaned in. You can't treat her like a normal student. She's not. She's a generational talent. If she stays here, she won't just stagnate. She'll be devoured. Amira spoke then. Devoured by who? Dr. Grayson didn't flinch. By people who fear what they don't expect. You, Amira, are the exception they were never prepared for. The meeting ended with Dr. Grayson offering a mentorship pipeline, research labs, online university-level coursework. She made no promises, only opportunities. Walter didn't sign anything that day, but something had changed. A door had opened, and word got out. At first it was a ripple, then a tide. Brookstone teachers stopped calling on Amira in class. Not all of them, but enough. When she handed in assignments, the feedback became thinner, less substantive. A quiet punishment masked as professional distance. Students whispered, not in open ridicule, but in smug sarcasm. Oh, guess we're all just dumb compared to Amira now. Did you solve that problem? Or did your genius babysitter do it for you? Even Tasha began to act different. Less eye contact, more silence at lunch. Amira asked once if she was okay. Tasha shrugged. You're in a different league now. People are talking. I just don't want to be caught in the crossfire. Amira tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes.
Walter noticed it too. The way his daughter walked a little slower when heading towards school. The way she took longer in the mornings, not to prepare but to brace.
He wanted to pull her out, but he also knew she didn't want to run. Then, one afternoon, Amira returned to her locker after gym class and froze. Her books were scattered on the floor. Across the metal door, written in red dry erase marker, were 4 words. Whoopee girl math free. No one stood nearby. No witnesses. Just her and the message. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She calmly picked up her books, wiped the marker off with her sleeve, and walked to class. But inside, something cracked. That night, Amira opened her laptop to find a news article shared by Dr. Grayson. 13-year-old genius from working-class background stuns Ivy League professors. Her name was on it. Her photo, too. Brookstone hadn't seen it yet, but some teachers don't just fail students. They try to break them. The secretary's hands hovered above her keyboard, but she didn't notice Amira watching. On the screen, bolded text caught the girl's eyes. Subject: Reevaluation request. Amira Collins' concern: decline in classroom behavior, defiance, emotional outbursts. Recommendation: consider revisiting her scholarship standing. Amira's heart thudded in her ears. Emotional instability. She hadn't cried. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't even raised her voice. But her silence had threatened them more than noise ever could. She stepped back, breathing shallow, and left the office before the secretary could ask why she was there. She didn't file a report. She knew it wouldn't matter. That night, Walter found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by the remains of her ruined books. She was trying to salvage pages, separating the syrup-stuck corners with tissue and tape. The smell of fake strawberry filled the room. Walter knelt beside her. You know who did it? Amira shook her head. Does it matter? He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed a trash bag and started helping. They didn't speak for a long time. But Amira felt something in the air shift. Not comfort, not forgiveness, resolve. The next morning, Miss Halbrick walked into class 10 minutes late. No explanation, just walked in, set her bag down, and picked up a piece of chalk like nothing had happened. But something happened. She was tense, short with students. And when her eyes fell on Amira, her expression soured into something too subtle for anyone else to notice. But Amira saw it. Resentment. Later that week, Amira discovered an anonymous online post circulating among Brookstone students. It was on a private forum, password protected, and full of back-channel gossip. One thread stood out. Scholarship spotlight. Is she really that smart? The post accused Amira of being a fraud, of receiving unfair assistance, of being protected because of optics. It included a photo of her from the STEM meeting, a photo that wasn't supposed to exist. The caption read, "Even janitors can raise codebreakers if the system lets them." The image had been taken from inside the university. Amira felt sick, violated. Only one other person from Brookstone had been in that building. Miss Halbrick. She confronted her after class. "Did you take this?" Amira asked, showing the printed image. Miss Halbrick didn't even blink. Students should be more careful where they leave their achievements. Pride is blinding. Amira stared at her. "You're trying to ruin me." "You ruined yourself," the teacher replied coldly, "by forgetting where you came from." Amira opened her mouth, then closed it. There were no safe words in a place like this. She walked out. Tasha caught up to her later in the stairwell. "Is it true?" Amira turned slowly. "What?" "That she took your picture. That she's the one behind the post." Amira didn't answer. Tasha looked away. "I didn't know. I swear. They kept asking me to sit with them. I got tired of being on the outside." Amira didn't need the apology. She already knew what loneliness could make people do. That night, Walter sat at their small kitchen table with a notepad. "You know what the worst part of mopping floors is?" he asked. Amira looked up. "You never get to leave a mark," he said. "Only erase everyone else's." She nodded slowly. "That's about to change." 2 days later, Amira receives a school-wide math award in a morning assembly, but as her name is called, no one claps, and Miss Halbrich doesn't even look up from her clipboard. The school's elite event becomes a stage for humiliation or history. The morning after the assembly, the school's front office buzzed with anticipation. Posters lined the hallways. Brookstone's annual alumni gala, honoring 50 years of legacy. Gold script, navy borders, and a heavy sense of exclusivity wrapped around every word. It wasn't just a party, it was a proving ground. The school's wealthiest donors and most notable graduates would walk its polished floors once more, and everything had to gleam. Amira wasn't supposed to be part of it. The invitation list didn't include students on scholarship, unless they were assigned to help with catering, coat check, or cleanup. That year, the staff quietly recommended Amira for hospitality support. It was pitched as a leadership experience, but she saw through it. So did Walter, who read the memo over her shoulder. "You don't have to do this," he said. Amira met his eyes. "No, I do." She wore her cleanest uniform that evening. Pressed it herself. She braided her hair in a tight, neat crown and packed her math notebook in her coat pocket. She had no idea why, but it made her feel grounded. The gala was held in the school's atrium, transformed with white tablecloths, towering floral arrangements, string quartets, and a red carpet. Waiters moved like ghosts in gloves, balancing trays of shrimp and imported cheese. Soft jazz played in the background as guests arrived in evening wear and high heels, their laughter echoing under chandeliers. Amira was stationed near the champagne bar, with a silver tray of hors d'oeuvre. She recognized some faces from portraits in the main hallway, alumni whose last names matched the school's wings. A few nodded at her without seeing her. She didn't see Miss Halbrich arrive, but when she turned toward the main hall, there she was, standing beside the headmaster, chatting with a former board chair, perfectly at ease. She looked past Amira like she was part of the decor. Then something strange happened. As the guests flowed in, a list was passed from table to table, guest seating, prepared by the faculty weeks in advance. Amira glanced at it as one of the other staff whispered, "Why is she listed there?" She saw it. Her name. Amira Collins, table 6, seated beside 2 alumni known for their roles in local politics. Across from them, Miss Halbrich. Amira froze. She hadn't been told. No one had informed her that she'd been seated, not staffed. The list was finalized. Her presence wasn't an accident. It was a setup. Later, she'd piece it together. Halbrich had arranged for Amira to serve hors d'oeuvre, then conveniently switched to sitting among the most judgmental donors. It was designed to confuse, to disrupt, to embarrass her. Either she'd show up in the wrong uniform, or be accused of overstepping. Either way, she'd be corrected. But Amira didn't falter. She quietly slipped into the restroom, removed her apron, and took out the blazer she'd hidden in her backpack. It wasn't formal, but it was clean. She brushed herself off, and walked to table 6 as if she'd been invited all along. Miss Halbrich's expression when she saw her was fleeting, but not subtle. Surprise followed by disdain, and finally, calculation. "Amira," she said, too sweetly, "I hadn't realized they'd added you to our table." "They did," Amira replied, calm as glass. "Last-minute change." The guests around the table smiled politely. Introductions were made. Conversations turned to politics, philanthropy, and STEM. When Amira spoke about the STEM Vanguard program, she saw eyebrows rise, but not in admiration. "So you're the janitor's daughter, right?" one man asked, blinking like it was a harmless question. "Yes," Amira said evenly. "And his name is Walter. He's worked here longer than most of the teachers." There was an awkward silence. One woman cleared her throat. "Well, it's wonderful to see such promise in unexpected places." Amira smiled. "It's even better when it's expected." Across the table, Miss Halbrick sipped her wine without a word. Then came the twist. Halfway through dinner, a guest approached their table. A tall woman in a midnight blue suit, with silver jewelry, and an unmistakable presence. She leaned down beside Amira and whispered, "I thought it was you." Amira turned, confused. "I'm sorry?" "Renee Patterson," the woman said, offering her hand. "CEO of Stratascale Tech. I saw your math demonstration at the regional seminar last month. You were unforgettable." Miss Halbrick froze. Amira blinked. "You were there?" "I was one of the judges. The scoring was anonymous, but your logic pathway's brilliant. I've been trying to find a way to connect with you." Amira nodded slowly, unsure what to say. Renee smiled. "Would you mind stepping away for a minute? I have something I think you'll want to hear." They walked off together, leaving the table in stunned silence. Later that night, Miss Halbrick asked the headmaster to remove Amira from all future Gala assignments. She claimed it was a distraction to the event's purpose, but it was already too late. The next morning, Walter finds his work locker broken into. Inside, Amira's last graded math assignment is missing, and her scholarship file has been tampered with. Behind every injustice, someone watches, someone with power. Walter's key didn't fit quite right when he returned to his locker the morning after the gala. The latch jammed, and when he pulled harder, the metal door creaked open with a sound that didn't belong. Something was off. The locker looked mostly untouched, but he noticed the absence before anything else. The folder Amira had given him last week, her graded math paper tucked neatly inside, was gone, and so was the spare envelope holding her scholarship documents, the copy they kept for safety. At first he thought maybe he'd misplaced it, but he didn't forget things like that. Walter looked around the janitor's closet. Nothing else was missing. Only Amira's academic proof. He didn't call attention to it. Not right away. He understood how Brookstone worked. It thrived on silence, and it punished noise. But when he passed the faculty lounge later that day, he overheard two staff members talking in low tone. "Renee Patterson? Really? That's who she walked out with." Apparently Patterson requested to meet her weeks ago. The school delayed the message. Walter stood perfectly still behind the wall. "That kind of exposure? It complicates things." Complicates who? He wanted to ask. But he already knew. That afternoon, Amira sat alone on a bench near the school's south courtyard, running her finger along the spine of her notebook. Her mind buzzed with questions about Renee Patterson, about the gala, and about the way Miss Halbrich's jaw had tightened when they left the table. Amira could feel it. Something had shifted. She didn't expect Renee to reach out again so soon. But just after last period, her phone buzzed. Email. "Amira, it was a pleasure meeting you last night. I have a standing mentorship program for students with exceptional promise. If you're open to it, I'd like to offer you a full 6-month STEM immersion under my team's guidance. Private meetings, travel stipends, lab access, all confidential. Let's talk." Amira reread the email 3 times. The offer was direct, specific, and real. She ran to the maintenance hallway and found Walter checking a supply shelf. She showed him the email, barely breathing. "You think it's real?" she whispered. Walter scanned it slowly. "The question isn't whether it's real. It's whether they'll let you take it." Amira frowned. "They..." Walter placed a hand on her shoulder. "This school, this place, they'll act like they support it, but they'll do everything they can to own it." He wasn't wrong. The next day, Miss Greaves, the science teacher, casually mentioned to Amira that outside mentorships might conflict with academic focus. A guidance counselor brought up adjustment periods, and not biting off too much. And the principal? He told her the school had no record of any formal request from Renee Patterson. "But she sent it to me directly," Amira insisted. "Unfortunately," the principal said, "students can't independently approve participation in outside academic programs. All requests must go through our college prep committee." Amira narrowed her eyes. Why didn't anyone tell me that when she first reached out? He smiled. It must have gotten lost. The message was clear. Brookstone wanted control over her story. But Renee didn't wait. She scheduled the first meeting anyway, inviting Amira and Walter to her downtown office that weekend. The space was sleek, glass walls, clean lines, tech displays humming softly in the background. Renee welcomed them with an ease that didn't feel performative. "I've seen what they're doing," she said plainly. "You don't need their permission to outgrow their shadow." Walter crossed his arms. "We've seen doors close fast around here. Too fast." "I open them," Renee said. "That's my job." She outlined the offer again: a 6-month mentorship, remote and in-person access to leading researchers, and protection from interference. It wasn't just a chance, it was insulation. Amira sat stunned. "Why me?" "Because you're not supposed to be here," Renee said, "and because you're not asking permission to exist." Walter finally nodded. "Then we'll do it." They shook hands, but even as Amira walked out, she could feel the weight of what had just begun. Brookstone hadn't said its last word. That evening, the head of school emails Walter directly, accusing him of violating student policy by accepting a private offer without administrative review, and CC'd on the message is Miss Halb. "When they can't beat your mind, they try to stain your name." The email arrived at 7:12 p.m. sharp. Sent from the head of school's direct address, it was addressed to Walter Collins, but CC'd several administrators, and Miss Halbrick. The subject line: urgent unauthorized external academic engagement. Walter read it twice before speaking. The message accused him of undermining the institution's educational integrity by failing to report Amira's participation in an unapproved mentorship. It cited concerns about ethical boundaries, student influence, and potential academic bias. No mention was made of Amira's achievements. No celebration of her invitation. Just administrative discipline wrapped in official language. Walter closed his laptop slowly. He stared at the floor. Amira sat across from him, watching. Her breath was shallow. "They're trying to drag you down through me," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Because they can't stop you any other way." The next morning at Brookstone, the air felt heavy. Students whispered louder. Teachers looked through Amira with a new kind of avoidance. The kind reserved for people who had suddenly become inconvenient. By third period, it was official. Amira had been called into a disciplinary meeting. She arrived in the office flanked by a counselor and an assistant principal. The head of school wasn't present, but Miss Halbrick was. The meeting began cold. "We're concerned about the integrity of your academic submissions," the assistant principal said. "Several recent scores appear inconsistent with your prior record." Amira stared. "You mean the assignments you refused to grade? We're also aware of your contact with external organizations," Miss Halbrick added, "which, while not explicitly prohibited, raises serious concerns about confidentiality and protocol." Amira didn't flinch. "So you're punishing me for being invited to something I earned?" "This isn't about punishment," the counselor said gently. "It always is," she replied. They handed her a printed statement. It wasn't a suspension, but something subtler, a formal warning for inappropriate academic boundary crossing, to be placed in her file. Her scholarship would be under review. Amira walked out without a word. That evening, Walter stood in the kitchen, staring at the same email as before. Then, quietly, he made a decision. He called Renee Patterson. The next day, Walter walked into school early, not with a mop, with a suit. He signed in at the front desk and asked to speak to the head of school. The principal's assistant hesitated, but Walter insisted. When he entered the office, he didn't ask to sit. "My daughter is being targeted," he said, "and I want it on record." The principal raised an eyebrow. "We're simply following our academic standards." Walter pulled out a folder. Inside, a copy of every assignment Amira had submitted, emails from teachers dismissing her work, a timeline of when her grades began shifting, and a printed transcript of the anonymous forum post that used a photo illegally taken during a private event. "You're not building a case," Walter said. "You're covering one up." The principal shifted uncomfortably. "This will need to go through our legal review." "That's fine," Walter replied. "So will mine." He left the office and walked directly to Amira's classroom. Through the glass window, he saw her sitting alone. He knocked once. She looked up, surprised. He didn't say anything, just lifted one hand in a silent gesture of strength. She smiled, but outside that window the walls were closing in. That night, Brookstone's server experiences a security breach, and Amira is accused of hacking into her own academic records. Truth hides in plain sight, if you dare to read it. The hacking accusation didn't hit Amira all at once. It leaked slowly into her world, starting with sideways glances from teachers, then hushed whispers in hallways. By lunchtime she knew something was wrong, and by last period she was summoned again. This time to the school's tech office. She sat across from a man in a pale blue shirt who refused to meet her eyes. "We detected irregular access to internal grading files," he said blandly. "It came from a device registered to your student login." Amira blinked. "I don't even know how to log into the admin panel." He nodded, non-committally. "There's an investigation pending."
No proof.
Just suspicion. Just pressure. Just another way to make her feel like a criminal for being exceptional. Walter picked her up that day in silence. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't have to. The quiet between them was thick with knowing. But the break in momentum didn't come from within the school. It came from Tasha. Late that night, Amira sat at the kitchen table staring blankly at a textbook she couldn't absorb. Her phone buzzed with a single text. "Tasha, check your email. Just sent you something." From someone who was supposed to delete it. Amira opened her inbox and found a forwarded message. No subject line, no preamble, just an attached email thread. She clicked. At first it looked like routine internal correspondence, Brookstone staff talking about performance trends and community culture. But by the third reply in the thread, the language shifted. It was cold, calculated, and unmistakably sinister. From L. Halbrick, AB Brookstone, to admin list BK. Subject: quiet attrition strategy. Internal. In reviewing our current roster of scholarship students, several patterns have emerged, specifically related to behavior, attitude, and perceived potential. While it's admirable to support diversity, we must avoid compromising academic integrity for optics. In cases where students exhibit above-average academic performance while lacking social fit or institutional loyalty, consider increasing academic pressure and procedural reviews. Let natural attrition do the work. We should avoid direct confrontation. A soft exit is preferable. Disengagement through redirection, reassignment, or policy enforcement is advised. Amira scrolled down, breath caught in her throat. One reply stood out from the head counselor. Quiet attrition strategy. Agreed. Starting with Amira Collins, her recent activity has made her complicated. We'll need documentation in place should she burn out. Her vision blurred. But she kept reading. They had planned her collapse. Not just Miss Halbrich. The whole system. They had documented her as a problem before she ever made one. Their goal hadn't been to support her. They'd been waiting for her to fail. Or better yet, to disappear. Amira sat in stunned silence. For the first time since she'd walked through Brookstone's polished doors, she didn't feel confused or paranoid. She felt confirmed. She forwarded the email to one person. Renee Patterson. The reply came in under 10 minutes. "I'm pulling in my legal team. Don't say a word to the school. Save everything. We've seen this before." Walter didn't speak when she showed him. He just nodded and made a phone call. The next morning the school was quiet. Too quiet. Administrators moved stiffly. Teachers were on edge. No one said her name aloud, but everyone knew. Amira received no apology. No retraction of the hacking claim. No explanation for the email. But things had changed. The silence had become fear. At lunch Tasha approached her. "I didn't know it went that far," she said. "I didn't know they had your name in it." Amira folded her arms. "You helped." "I didn't do it for the school," Tasha said. "I did it for the girl who taught herself calculus because her dad couldn't afford tutoring." Amira said nothing, but her gaze softened. Just a little. The real shift came that evening. An unmarked car pulled up outside their apartment building. A woman stepped out with a briefcase and a card. Civil rights attorney, under contract with Renee's firm. She sat at the kitchen table with Amira and Walter and asked one question. "Do you want this to be quiet or do you want it to matter?" Walter looked at his daughter. Amira didn't hesitate. "I want it to matter." By the next day, media began circling. A local education watchdog blog posted a leak about racial profiling strategies at a top prep school. A regional reporter emailed Amira directly for comment. She didn't respond. Not yet. She wasn't ready to speak. Not to the public. Not to strangers. The scars were still fresh, and the game was still being played. But now she had something Brookstone hadn't expected. Leverage. That night, as Amira lies in bed, her phone lights up again. This time with a voicemail from someone she's never met, a former Brookstone teacher, who says, "I know what they did to you, and I've got more." A father who stayed silent for too long decides to make noise. Walter had never spoken at a public meeting. He wasn't a man who liked attention. For years he worked silently in the halls of Brookstone, washing floors, fixing locks, unclogging toilets. He blended into the edges of the school, like the linoleum they walked on every day, unseen, necessary, ignored. But that morning, he wore his only suit. The one with the frayed sleeves. The same one he wore when Amira got into Brookstone. The same one he had almost thrown away a dozen times. Tonight it fit like armor. The monthly school board meeting wasn't a glamorous affair. Usually it was just a few parents, a row of administrators, and a tired agenda. But tonight, the chairs filled fast. Word had gotten out. An anonymous leak, something about a janitor's daughter, a mentorship offer, and a series of damning emails. Rumors swirled: racism, retaliation, rigged grades. Local news vans parked outside. Walter arrived just before the meeting began. He didn't stand near the teachers or the staff. He waited in the back, silent, holding a thick manila envelope under one arm. When the floor opened to public comments, he stepped forward. Some recognized him. A few whispered his name, but most just blinked in confusion, unsure why the janitor was approaching the microphone. Walter placed the envelope on the podium, cleared his throat and spoke. "My name is Walter Collins. I've worked at Brookstone Academy for 11 years. Most of you know me, not by name, just by uniform." He paused. "My daughter is Amira Collins. She's 13 years old, gifted in mathematics, and one of the brightest students this school has ever had. And this institution has spent the last 6 months trying to erase her." A hush fell over the room. Walter pulled out a printed email, the same one Amira had shown him. "This was written by one of your own. A teacher who's trusted with shaping minds." He read it aloud, word for word, the quiet attrition strategy. The line about Amira's complicated presence. The part where staff agreed to let natural attrition do the work. Gasps. A few scattered murmurs. Someone in the back cursed under their breath. Walter kept going. He listed each time Amira had been dismissed, erased, punished. The false accusations. The shifting grades. The broken locker. The night they blamed her for a system breach she couldn't have caused. "I've watched this place smile at my child while sharpening knives behind its back. I cleaned your halls while you planned to push her out of them." The room was frozen. Miss Halbridge, seated near the front, stood abruptly. "This is highly inappropriate. These are unverified documents." "Sit down," one board member snapped. But she didn't. She tried to walk toward the podium. A security guard stepped forward, blocking her path. "Ma'am, please return to your seat," he said firmly. She refused. The guard escorted her out, heels clicking, face tight with rage. Walter turned back to the microphone. "I'm not asking for justice," he said. "I'm demanding it." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "My resignation," he said, "effective immediately. I won't clean a place that sees my daughter as a stain." He left the paper on the podium and walked out. The room didn't move. Not for several seconds. No one clapped. No one booed. The air was too thick with reckoning. The next morning, the story aired across 3 local channels. Custodian's speech exposes racism at elite school. Clips of Walter's reading spread across social media. Hashtags followed. So did outrage. Parents called. Donors emailed. Teachers whispered. Brookstone's head of school sent a campus-wide message by noon. "Effective immediately, we are launching an emergency internal review of staff behavior, grading practices, and student treatment procedures." That evening, Amira opens her school email and sees a new message, a formal summons to a disciplinary integrity hearing, and the signature at the bottom, Ms. Halbrick. The email came with no warning, no explanation, and no chance to refuse. Amira was instructed to appear at an official school demonstration, part of what the head of school described as a restorative trust initiative. The invitation was coded in politeness, but the intent was sharp. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a stage. The school claimed it was meant to clear her name, following the recent controversy around unauthorized mentorship activity and system access concerns. But everyone knew what it really was: a test, a public test, a performance. Walter read the email twice, jaw tightening. "They want to Amira didn't argue. She just said quietly, "Then let's give them one." By Friday morning, Brookstone's main auditorium had been transformed into something between a lecture hall and a courtroom. Teachers filed in alongside school board members, parents, and alumni. Some donors were in attendance too, drawn by the media coverage and the promise of a rare display of academic potential in action. Cameras were positioned discreetly, but Amira saw them all. She counted 3 reporters, a photographer from the local paper, and a video stream run by the school's own PR team. This wasn't about redemption. It was about optics. On stage stood a whiteboard, flanked by 2 faculty members. In the center, a desk with a single marker, resting like a sword waiting to be lifted. The equation was already written. Dense, sprawling, multi-layered, college-level calculus twisted into abstract logic, designed not to test knowledge, but to intimidate. Miss Halbrick sat in the front row, clipboard on her lap, lips pursed like she was already preparing her rebuttal. When Amira walked on stage, a hush fell. She wasn't in uniform. She wore a simple navy blouse, black pants, and her braids pulled back tightly. Her posture was calm, but her hands were clenched at her sides. The head of school stood at the podium. As part of our commitment to transparency, we have asked Miss Collins to walk us through a live solution of this advanced equation. Her participation is voluntary and will serve to resolve any lingering doubts surrounding recent events. Doubts. That's what they called it now. Amira approached the board. The lights were warm on her face. The room was painfully quiet. She picked up the marker and stared at the equation. And then she smiled. It wasn't familiar in structure, but the logic behind it was. She'd seen it before in an old textbook her father had brought home from a yard sale. It had taken her 2 weeks to understand it. Now she understood it in seconds. She began writing. She worked slowly at first, narrating her thought process, not for herself but for them. She explained her rationale, broke down each segment of the formula, and asked rhetorical questions aloud, guiding the audience through the logic as if she were the teacher. And then 3 lines in, she stopped. She circled part of the equation. This, she said, tapping the chalkboard, is where the original method fails. It assumes all variables are independent, but in this configuration, they're nested dependencies. Miss Halbrick leaned forward. Amira continued. The standard approach simplifies this segment through substitution, but that's inefficient. There's a better way. She erased the last 2 lines and rewrote them using an advanced identity rarely taught outside university-level math. Her hand moved with precision, confidence, grace. It was math, but it was art. By the time she reached the final line, she turned back to the audience. And that, she said, is the correct solution. Including a correction to the decades-old structure this problem was based on. Silence. No applause. No movement. Just stillness. Until someone clapped. Soft. 1 beat. Then another. Then more. And suddenly the room erupted. Not in roaring celebration, but in something quieter, more stunned. Recognition. People looked at each other, unsure how to react. Some stood. Others nodded. A few were still frozen. Walter watched from the back. He didn't smile, he just breathed. Miss Halbrick? She said nothing. Her pen hovered over her clipboard, unmoving. A man from the state's math curriculum board approached the stage. What you just did, he said to Amira, not through a microphone, but face to face, is the kind of clarity we build textbooks around. Amira nodded once. I know. Cliffhanger. As the crowd disperses, Miss Halbrick slips out a side door just as a reporter approaches her with a microphone and a printed copy of the leaked email chain. Her eyes widen. For the first time, she has no words. The applause faded, but its echoes lingered long after the crowd left the auditorium. Amira had walked off stage without a word, without a smile, without any need for validation. She had done what she came to do, and the silence Miss Halbrick once used as a weapon had now turned against her. By the following Monday, the fallout began. The email chain, once whispered about, was now public record. Screenshots circulated on parent forums, activist blogs, and even a segment on a local news station. The quiet attrition strategy became a national phrase overnight, proof of how racism operated not through slurs or shouting, but through structure, through policy, through polite, practiced cruelty. Miss Halbrick was placed on administrative leave that morning. By the afternoon, she was gone. No announcement, no farewell email, just a sterile statement from the school board. Due to internal personnel matters, one staff member will be transitioning out of Brookstone Academy effective immediately. But that wasn't all. Walter received 2 job offers within the week, from 2 nearby schools that saw in him not just a custodian, but a man of principle. One even offered him a facility supervisor role, something that came with benefits, and a salary far above what Brookstone had ever paid. He didn't answer either offer right away. Instead, he walked the halls of Brookstone one last time, not with a mop, but with the quiet pride of a father who had refused to shrink. Amira, meanwhile, was invited to speak at 3 STEM conferences, contacted by a regional senator's office, and offered a full-ride scholarship to an elite STEM-focused boarding academy in the Pacific Northwest, not just for her math skills, but for her clarity, her composure, and her courage. The school board at Brookstone scrambled to repair what they could. They announced a new task force on inclusive academic practices, mandatory anti-racism training for faculty, and the creation of a student oversight council that included scholarship recipients. It was progress, but it came too late for Amira to care. She accepted the scholarship offer, quietly, without fanfare. But before she left, she asked Walter for one thing. To go back, she said. One more time. She walked through the halls, not as a student, but as something else, something Brookstone hadn't prepared for. She wasn't just the janitor's daughter anymore. She wasn't a problem, or a curiosity, or a cautionary tale. She was proof. Proof that the system could be beaten, not by shouting, not by begging, but by being undeniable. She stepped into her old math classroom. It was empty, echoing with faint memories. The whiteboard stood as clean as ever, wiped of equations, comments, and the silent humiliations that had once lived there. She picked up a marker and hesitated. Then, with a steady hand, she wrote a single number in the center of the board.
Through both.
Her IQ, her burden, her power. She capped the marker, placed it gently on the desk, and turned to leave. Cliffhanger. As she exits the room, she hears the faint sound of a door creaking open. Someone else had been watching, waiting, and they just stepped inside. 1 year later, the walls of Brookstone Academy still shone with quiet perfection. The marble floors remained polished, the windows spotless, the brass plaques proudly displaying names of donors and legacy families. But tucked behind the west wing, just past the main science corridor, a new plaque had been installed, one no amount of money could have bought. The math lab had a new name now. The Amira Collins Mathematics Center. No grand donor check had funded it. No alumni vote had demanded it. It had come quietly, first as a whisper from the Oversight Council, then a petition from students, and finally a unanimous vote from a restructured board of trustees, who understood that some legacies weren't bought, but earned. The dedication ceremony was brief. The head of school, now someone new, spoke about excellence, resilience, and the role of truth in education. Several students read excerpts from Amira's math conference speech. One of them, a tall, soft-spoken girl in her first year on scholarship, recited a line that made Walter close his eyes. When systems are designed to erase you, surviving becomes its own kind of genius. Walter stood at the back, wearing a new navy suit. Not borrowed, not faded, his own. It fit him like the floor had once fit his mop, a second skin. But today he carried nothing in his hands. No tools, no keys, just pride. He watched as students filed past the plaque, polished steel, etched deeply with Amira's name, beneath a line that read, "For the ones they underestimated." There were no speeches from Amira. She wasn't there physically. She was already thriving at her new academy, preparing to enter an early college program that would place her in advanced theoretical mathematics before she turned 16. But she had sent a letter to be read aloud, handwritten, signed with care. This room used to feel like a trap. Today it feels like a promise. May it challenge you, yes, but never define you by where you come from. Numbers never cared about your last name. Neither should the people who teach them. The words landed like truth on stone. After the ceremony ended, students wandered through the space. The walls were lined with math posters, new computers, and a timeline of breakthroughs by young prodigies, Amira included. But something else caught the attention of one student in particular. A black girl, maybe 12, with wide eyes and a quiet strength in the way she walked. She stopped at the whiteboard. It was clean, except for one corner. There, untouched for months, was a single number. 16. No one had erased it. She stared at it for a long time. Then, with one slow breath, she reached for a nearby marker. She held it in her hand, paused, and stepped forward. The camera fades just as the student touches the board, ready to begin something all her own. If you've ever been underestimated because of where you come from or what you look like, then you know this wasn't just her story. It's happening in classrooms, offices, and quiet hallways every day. No child should have to fight this hard just to be seen. Type yes if you believe brilliance deserves a fair chance. Subscribe if this broke your heart and opened your eyes.